pomaže Bog, Christ in our midst. Dobrodošli na crkvenu školu za ovu 9. nedjelju posle duhovi. Welcome to the Sunday Church School. Danas je veoma zanimljiv svetitelj, će biti tema Sveti novo ispovednik i mučnik Varnava, osnov i gerijski, to jeste Geri Indijana. On je poreklom sa naših američkih prostora. Today we have a very interesting saint, Saint Varnava of Osno, an ancient diocese in Serbia, and of Geri. And yes, that's Geri, Indiana. But before Papadi gives you a very beautiful and interesting presentation, let us pray to the Lord. U ime Otca i Sina i Svetoga Duha, Oče naš, koji si na nebesima, da se sveti ime Tvoje, da dođe carstvo Tvoje, da bude volja Tvoje na zemlji kao što je na nebu. Hljeb naš naslušni daj nam danas i oprosti nam dugove naše, kao što mi smo do Hrista svojih, navedi nas u iskušenje, ne Tvoje nam se budu blago. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, forgive us our debts, and we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Preblagi Gospode, pošalji nam blagodat Svetoga Tvoga, koji oblasjava i krepi duše naše sile, da bismo, slušajući pažljivo nauku koje nam se predaje, dorasli Tebi, Tvorcu našem, na slavu roditeljima našim, na radost, na otečbini crkvi našem, na koristi. Most blessed Lord, send down upon us the grace Thy Holy Spirit to down confirm our spiritual powers, and giving heed to the instruction impart to us, we may increase therein to Thy glory for our Creator, to the comfort and joy of our parents, and to the benefit of our church and commonwealth. Amen.
Good morning, and welcome to our next edition of Serbian saints who labored or have a tie to America is what we've been focusing on the last couple of weeks. So far we have heard of these contemporary saints, modern day saints, who lived and labored in America, uniting the Serbian people in the United States and establishing and founding the Serbian Orthodox Diocesan Church in America. Today we have another Serbian saint, a little bit different in his life, but a very contemporary and modern day saint for the Serbian people. He is Saint Varnava of Geri, Indiana, and Hosnovo of the Bosnia region of Serbia. He was actually born in America, so a little different than, say, Sveti Nikola or Saint Medadije, who were born in Serbia and came to America to missionize and to work with the American people. He was born in America of immigrant parents who had come to and settled in the area of Geri, Indiana, which is right outside of Chicago. And he was born in 1914. So he was born later than Saint Medadije, Saint Sebastian, Saint Nikolai. He was a contemporary of theirs, as a matter of fact, very much admiring and having connections to Saint Nikolai. His parents came to America, had probably worked in the steel mills. Geri, Indiana was a heavy Serbian settled community, probably worked in that area. But when he was 9 years old, his parents decided to venture back to Serbia. So they leave the United States, where he had been attending the church at the St. Sava parish in Geri, which is now the St. Sava parish, still an existing parish in Maryville, Illinois. Also, if you research his life, his house where he was born and raised is still standing in the Geri, Indiana area. He had attended the elementary school in Frobel in Geri. He was very fluent in Serbian, very much into reading Serbian folklore, reciting Serbian poetry. When 1923, when his parents returned back to Serbia, he attended high school in Sarajevo, graduating with honors in 1933. He very much decided to attend seminary and to study theology and to become a monk. His father took him to see Saint Nikolai. The family already knew of Saint Nikolai, Bishop Nikolai Velimirovich, and at that time, he was very instrumental in working with the seminary in Belgrade. So Saint Nikolai was able to get he was born Vojislav into the seminary. He graduated with honors in 1937 from two high schools in Sarajevo, and then had gone on to study at the seminary. St. Nikolai commented about him, his works are, and more so his spiritual ascetic life, he won over the hearts of all the young Serbs, and he was their spiritual leader and teacher. Faith and service to God had been pushed aside by the political regime of power coming in of the communists, but he was able to restore the faith as the center of people's lives. And then once again, it's just by his actions, by his beautiful words, by his love that he showed for his people, by his devotion to the faith, and as you will see, by his endurance in many trials. His spiritual and moral values overcame the material of the world. His only desire was once again to serve God. He abandoned his career in teaching. After his graduation from seminary, he was a teacher at high schools in Sarajevo, where people were very fond of him. But that was not what he wanted. He wanted nothing more than to serve God and to serve God alone, to work for the church and to instill the faith in the Serbian people. He abandoned his teaching career and joined a Miloshevo monastery, where he became a monastic. In 1940, he was taught as a monk, giving up all his earthly wealth for the service of God. And at that point, he took the name Barnabas, after the holy apostle Barnabas. The same year, he was ordained a deacon. In 1941, in the midst of World War II, he decided to remain in Sarajevo. As you know, the area of, if you studied any Serbian history, the history of the former Yugoslavia, that area became under the communist occupation, and in April 6, 1941, the German troops invaded Yugoslavia. On April 17th, the Yugoslav army surrendered to the Germans. Sarajevo at that point in time then falls under the control of Croatia, and the communist power goes to shade the Croatian rulers, who are very vindictive. And we think of persecution of Christians in maybe the Middle East, or in areas that are predominantly Turk-ruled, or maybe even they're thinking of persecution of Christians when we studied early Christianity, back in the times of St. Peter and St. Paul, or back in the times of the early apostles, when churches were held in caves and in catacombs, where you could not worship openly. Well, it was much the same in the former Yugoslavia during the occupation and the communist times, and that the Serbian people endured the inability to worship openly in the 50s and 60s. This was not something that we're talking about centuries ago. We're talking modern times. We're talking this century. We're talking of not being able to baptize your children openly, not being able to be a priest and walk the streets with your mantilla on openly. We're speaking of not being able to hold your slava, or to openly celebrate Christmas for fear of losing your livelihood, which was your income, your job, because the communists would take it from you. So communism and atheism are synonymous. They go together. And that is where St. Barnaba found himself as he began his ministry and serving God and the church as a monastic. As Sarajevo fell under Croatian control, the Ustashi War raged a war of terror against the Serbian Orthodox Church. Clergy were subject to beatings, torture, violence, arrest, and deportation. The Ustashi attempted to strip the Serbian people of their identity and form the Croatian Orthodox Church, of which they then summoned Hierodeacon Barnaba to take the seat as head as bishop. Hoping to play on his pride, they summoned him to where they were meeting, and hoping that he would agree on their decision to become the bishop of the Croatian Orthodox Church. This was an attempt of subversion against the Serbian people in Croatia and Bosnia, and he flatly refused. That was a bold move, to be able to say, no, I'm not doing it because I'm Serbian. I am part of the Serbian Orthodox Church under the Serbian Patriarchate. I love my people. I love my faith, but I will not abdicate for my own safety, my own livelihood, or my ability to progress or to elevate myself. He was a man of God. He was a very holy man. He soon had to flee Sarajevo to save his own life for this decision that he made. One that later down the road may have cost him his own life. During this time, in 1944, Serbia was liberated from the invaders, only to find a new rule of communism under the regime of Joseph Tito taking control, and new terror being instilled upon the Orthodox Church and the faithful. During this time, dozens of clergy were shot by the communists. In 1945, as we heard last week, at this time, Saint Nikolai, Bishop Nikolai Benaminovich, and the Patriarch of Serbia, Gavrilo, were held at Dacha, the concentration camp. In 1945, they were released. And in 1946, Patriarch Gavrilo returns to head the Serbian Orthodox Church. In 1945, Higher Deacon Varnava was ordained a monk priest. In May of 1947, in the midst of all this turmoil, the Holy Synod of Bishops elects Higher Monk Varnava to be bishop. On Transfiguration, August 19, 1947, he was ordained to the Holy Episcopate and became a bishop. He became a bishop of the Diocese of Hosno in Kosovo, Metohija, and served as vicar bishop to Patriarch Gavrilo, who was released and now trying to reestablish the foundation of the Serbian Church in this communism and persecution in now the communist Yugoslavia. See the similarities of endurance and strife and affliction between all the saints, Serbian saints that we have studied. None of their lives were easy. None of them were without trial and tribulation. None of them were without temptation to get them to succumb to abandoning faith and the glory of God. He, at some point, returns to Sarajevo, and in his sermons, he takes a very bold move and begins to criticize the communist establishment and the communist government for its mistreatment of the church and the faithful. This, unfortunately, did not go unnoticed by the communist regime. And in December 25th, 1947, just a few months after he was named bishop, he was arrested and imprisoned by the communists. The Holy Synod appealed repeatedly to the government and to Tito to free Bishop Varnava from prison, all to which was in avail. In fact, the tortures got harsher. They became more frequent. He moved him from prison to prison. He was accused at one point of being an American spy. He was accused of teaching his sister English so that she could also be an American spy. He was not even able to talk. He himself wrote repeated letters to Tito to ask for his release and to explain his situation. And the letters were never even replied to. He wasn't even given the opportunity to defend himself by any statement. His treatment would just become harsher if he even tried. He was accusing an attempt to exploit and overthrow the communist government. He was accused of defending the Chetniks, and that any Serb who fought against the Chetniks were traitors of the Serbian people and of Serbia. These were very bold accusations, very harsh accusations that were being made and slandered against him by the communist regime. And even by some people within the church itself who were saying, oh, just acquiesce, give up, play along with their game. Something he would not do. He would not abdicate the faith. He would not give up what he stood for. And this is our talk of endurance, our endurance in trial and tribulation. How do we stand? How strong is our foundation of our faith? Are we building our house of love of God on sand, on unstable land? Or are we building on a foundation of rock, the rock of St. Peter? There were many false accusations against him, but he heroically and very humbly defended himself in court, saying that the current regime did not know God and that he was disappointed in the many atheists that were among his brethren, his own. On March 3rd, 1948, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 11 years of harsh labor in prison, under the conviction that his aim was to overthrow and endanger the state regime. He was dubbed the traitor bishop by the communist state. The news spread quickly and widely to the United States about his arrest and his being found guilty of the accusations against him, false guilty. A prayer service was held by Sveti Nikola, Sveti Nikola at the time, at St. Salva's Cathedral, our own very own St. Salva's Cathedral in New York City, praying for his safe release and to give him strength. He gained much support from the anti-communist American government and the American Serbian people. All his punishment was due, in fact, to refusing to work for the partisans in 1944, and his not wanting to sell short the Serbian people, to stand behind faith, freedom, and country. 1948, he was sent to prison in Stolac in Bosnia, where he endured much bullying and humiliation. He was even refused to be given Holy Communion while in prison. Efforts were made by the Patriarchate to secure his release, including private meetings between the newly elected Patriarch, who succeeded the late Patriarch Gavrilo, and Marshal Tito. In 1950, a plea letter was sent seeking his release by the Holy Synod of Bishops to Tito. All these were ignored. His punishment continued and increased. He was starved, he was tortured, he was kept isolated. The prison administration wanted him transferred elsewhere, and he was to be moved to the prison in Sremska Mitrovica in Vojvodina. He was handcuffed to a Roman Catholic priest, and as prisoners together, they were loaded with other prisoners onto a train. The train, carrying the prisoners arrived in Sremska Mitrovica. The locomotive of the train detached itself, but left the car with all the prisoners, including St. Barnaba and the Catholic priest, on the tracks. In the midst of the night, a train comes barreling down the tracks. They had intentionally left the train, the locomotive, the car there with all the prisoners in it. Train comes barreling down, crashes into the car where they are all stranded and handcuffed. And many were killed, some were just seriously injured, and they all, in this accident, St. Barnaba both of his legs were broken. The wicked establishment of the government refused medical care to be given to these injured and dying who were laying on the tracks. He eventually was taken to a hospital where they were attempting to operate on his legs, to put rods in to make him able to walk again, but the government stopped the surgery and had him moved to another prison. For some time later, he was brought back to the hospital, though, and he had spent months and months in recovery, where he miraculously did survive. After his discharge, he was for a time in Belgrade, where many faithful came to visit him, but this disturbed the authorities. At that time, they moved him in 1941 to a place of house arrest at a monastery, Gomonica, in Banja Luka. He spent years in prayer and fasting under constant guard, but he was an inspiration there to the other monks of faith who came to visit. By January 1959, he had attempted to collect a handicap, because he was disabled, money. That was even denied to him. Everything would be denied to him because this was part of the persecution of the Christians. In January 1959, I was informed that his 11-year sentence was up. With only the mantya that he wore while he was in prison, he went to Krušedol Monastery in Fruška Gora to live in a modest cell. His slight wages that he was able to attain there were given to the poor and needy around there. But even then, he continued to be under close scrutiny of the government. He was not free, and he was harassed weekly, and where he saw weekly visits from security police who would appear there to just check on his whereabouts and to see what he was doing. This was part of the harassment and part of their attempt to coerce him to their side. Their attempt to get him to sign papers committing his loyalty to them were always in vain. He would never relinquish his faith to succumb to the seductions of the Communist Party. There were many orders that were drawn up on his request to return to active bishop, but he was moved back to Gomonitsa Monastery because they did not want him to be able to attend the sabbat that would be coming up. Even this did not deter him. He continued to serve with fervor to serve his church. In May of 1961, we're talking 60 years ago, not long ago by any means, as that was the year I was born. May 1961, he again wrote to the Council of Bishops to reinstate active service. But the state vetoed the Holy Synod's ruling, overruling what the church said that he could then be an active serving bishop. They said, no, he must continue to be under house arrest. Under pressure from the state, he was transferred to another monastery, Biosin, in 1963. Kept under constant guard and house arrest, his mental and physical state suffered greatly. Upon hearing this, Patriarch Gehrman sought his release. While he was there, he kept himself in strict ascetic prayer and fasting. He did not eat at all on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the fast days of the church. He never ate meat and fish only on great feast days, and oil only on Saturdays and Sundays. He was in constant prayer. He even encouraged those who guarded him to fast. Imagine even talking to the enemy, let alone trying to persuade them to fast. The injuries he sustained while he was in prison caused him to be a disabled citizen, but the hypocrisy was so great he could never collect disability benefits. He continued to press the state to have him return to active service, which infuriated the Communist Party even more. There was talk of him moving to America to pursue his ministry. He was awaiting paperwork from the U.S. Embassy. This did not suit the interests of the state, where it was too much a risk for him to be entering America and to be able to tell and exploit the regime that was in power in Yugoslavia. The authorities tightened more control over him, forbidding him even to leave Biosin Monastery. Word was out that he was going to leave, though, and go to Sveti Nikola, the seminary there, to give a sermon. This was to the chagrin of all the state authorities. It was on the day of his repose was November 12, 1964, when he was taken by his uncle to the dentist. As they were returning to the monastery, he complained of not feeling well. A few moments of suffering and great pain, he reposed in the Lord. His repose is considered to be under suspicious circumstances by the Serbian church, by the people in America, by the Serbian people. Some people believe that he was poisoned by the communist state government. His body was buried at the Holy Ascension Church at the Monastery of Biosin. On May 15, 2005, he was glorified as saint at the Zitomishli Monastery. Saint Bernard of Gary was born in America, was a bishop in Serbia, a true example of a modern-day sainthood who endured the struggles of the communist regime following the life in Yugoslavia during after World War II. He also was the first American-born Serbian priest, monk, to be canonized a saint. Saint Megadia and Saint Sebastian's canonization occurred after, in the late 2000s. So this is a story of endurance. It's a story of endurance in all adversity. And how do we endure? Do we gripe? Do we grumble? Do we succumb to coercion and pressure, bullying? Do we succumb to to putting our faith second over other things, over the secular in our lives. Look at the lives of the saints as an example of endurance. And this is what we're going to talk about more for the in-class lesson, is endurance and perseverance in adversity and pressure. We would like to invite all the parents, teachers, and children to participate in our upcoming Dormition Fast activities this coming week. Thursday evening at 5 p.m., we will have a session where we will decorate the Pleštenica, just as we do the Pleštenica for Christ on Great and Holy Friday. We're going to decorate the Pleštenica for the Mother of God. And we'll have some lessons on the Dormition that evening. On Friday, of course, is Vigil with the procession with the Pleštenica for the Holy Dormition. What is it, 6:30 p.m. And Saturday, Divine Liturgy at 9 a.m. For Dormition, followed by the blessing of flowers. We ask all parents and children to bring a potted plant, adults as well, to be blessed, as is a tradition on Dormition in many Orthodox countries, to bless flowers for Dormition. You'll be able to take your plant home and plant it. Take one that's a perennial, like a mum, so it will come back every year as a reminder for you. We'll also have some lessons at that point afterwards, and finish our work on our mural of Serbian saints. We can have it up in the church when we do our Serb Festival September 18 and 19. Sunday we'll have a brief outing, weather permitting, an outdoor coffee hour. Hopefully at the Wall Park. We will do sports. They have a soccer field. We'll bring some sporting stuff with us, and we'll have a nice coffee hour outside as a get together before we actually launch the actual school year. So have a great week, guys. Looking forward to seeing everybody for the events. And Father will now lead us in closing prayer.
Zahvaljujemo ti, Stvoritelj, što si nas udostoje svoje milosti, te smo pažljivo slušali nauku koji nam se predaje. Spasi, pomiluj, starešine naše roditelje, učitelje, koji nas vode da poznamo istinu i nama daruj snagu i moć da možemo produžiti korisno učenje. We thank thee, that thou hast vouchsafed us thy grace in giving heed to learning. Bless our masters, parents, teachers, and bring to us the knowledge of truth, and grant us strength and firmness to preserve the study. S nama je Bog svoj milošću, blagoslovi uvek vek. Amen. God is with us, who is grace and mercy and mankind, always now and ever into age of ages. Amen.
Thank you, and have a great week. Looking forward to seeing everybody. We will have in person after Divine Liturgy class. Should I put yours up there?